Welcome to Shadows at Dusk. Dusk is not the end. It's the doorway between two worlds. A place where stories slip through, quiet, cold, and true. You've entered that space now, and what follows is meant for you. Stay in the shadow. Twin lumens sliced the obsidian expanse ahead, carving fleeting tunnels through the profound dark, eventually snagging on a solitary shape huddled by the asphalt ribbon's edge. Decades of ingrained caution screamed against the impulse, yet something in the figure's slumped resignation, the involuntary flinch against my high beams, compelled a deceleration. That single concession to empathy I could not fathom then was the ignition point for the most harrowing night etched into my memory. Hours had dissolved behind me, the highway's hypnotic drone punctuated only by the sporadic crackle of a radio searching vainly for purchase on the airwaves. The dashboard glowed 2:17 a.m., a spectral hour when weariness laid siege to my eyelids. Perhaps fatigue was the culprit, the insidious whisper suggesting companionship might stave off sleep's encroaching tide. Perhaps that's why the gravel chewed under my tires as I eased onto the shoulder. Closer now, the man materialized from the gloom, tall, whip-thin, features obscured by a ragged beard, his attire speaking of long miles and scant comfort. A burdened pack slumped from one shoulder. His thumb jutted out, not hopefully, but with a stark, bone-deep desperation. The window descended, admitting a rush of cool, damp night. Destination, I projected into the stillness. He scuttled closer, relief momentarily smoothing the harsh lines of his face. Just down the way, his voice rasped, like stones tumbling in a dry creek bed. Next town, maybe, if your path runs that far. A moment's pause. Parental warnings, ingrained axioms of self-preservation echoed in the chambers of my mind, but the sheer desolation of the landscape, the man's apparent vulnerability, what sort of creature would abandon him here? All right, get in, I conceded, the electronic click of the locks sounding unnaturally loud. He heaved the pack onto the rear seat and folded himself into the passenger side. An aroma, musty and indistinct, old sweat, the stale smoke, the scent of transient existence, permeated the confined space. Appreciate it, he murmured, securing the belt. Truly, a godsend. Back on the asphalt river, silence stretched, taut and uncomfortable. Elias, I offered, a brief, sideways glance. Silas, he returned, gaze fixed firmly on the unfolding road ahead. We traveled through miles measured only by the engine's thrum and the rhythmic percussion of tires on pavement. Regret began to curdle in my stomach. Then Silas spoke, his voice startling in the quiet. What's got you burning the midnight oil out here? Returning home, I supplied, keeping it brief. Work trip, and you? A non-committal shrug, just moving toward where I need to be. The vagueness prickled, a small alarm bell sounding in the back of my consciousness. I quelled it, Not everyone craved confessional intimacy with strangers. Home for you is where? I probed, attempting to sustain a semblance of normalcy. Nothing to write home about, Silas deflected, then pivoted. Mind if I light up? I shook my head. Apologies, but no smoking in here. A grunt was his sole reply. He shifted, restless. Peripheral vision caught his hand dipping into a pocket. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, adrenaline delivering a cold, electric jolt. But the hand emerged clutching only a foil packet of gum. He popped a piece into his mouth, the small act somehow amplifying the tension. I exhaled, a silent, self-deprecating chuckle at my own jumpiness. Onward we drove, the odometer relentlessly chronicling the passage of quiet miles. Just as I began to convince myself my apprehension was unfounded, Silas's demeanor shifted palpably. His fidgeting intensified. Incessant mirror checks, quick, furtive glances over his shoulder at the empty blackness pursuing us. A knee began a frantic, percussive bounce. A hand raked repeatedly through lank, greasy hair. "You all right over there?" I ventured, striving for nonchalance. "Yeah, fine," he clipped, the denial utterly unconvincing. It was then that the night fractured, flashing lights, piercing strobes of azure and crimson erupted in my rearview mirror. A patrol car closing fast, its siren beginning its mournful climb. Instinctively, my foot eased off the accelerator, preparing to yield the shoulder. "What are you doing?" Silas hissed, the sound sharp, serrated. "Police," I stated, bewildered by his vehemence. "Pulling over." "No." The word was an explosion. He lunged across the console, hand clamping onto the steering wheel. "Drive. Keep driving." The vehicle bucked violently. I wrestled for command, muscles straining. "What the hell, Silas?" I yelled, shoving him back. But reason had fled him. In a terrifyingly fluid movement, he plunged a hand inside his jacket. It reappeared clutching dark metal, a compact pistol, its muzzle aimed unwaveringly at my temple. I said, "Drive," he snarled, the earlier mask of weary politeness utterly disintegrated. Ice water sluiced through my veins. Nausea clawed at my throat. Trembling fingers found the accelerator, pressing down, the needle sweeping urgently across the speedometer. "Silas, listen," I pleaded, voice straining for calm it didn't possess. "Whatever this is, we can sort it out. Just lower the gun." A bark of laughter, devoid of all mirth. "Shut your mouth. Drive. Next exit. Take it." The pursuing siren screamed, closer now, joined by the distant pulse of more approaching lights. Whatever specter haunted Silas, it wore a uniform. The exit ramp loomed, a diverging path into deeper uncertainty. Off the highway under his command, my fate felt terrifyingly malleable. Stay on the road, surrounded by converging law enforcement, and violence seemed inevitable. Time warped, stretching thin as we hurtled toward the concrete artery branching off into darkness. Silas was shouting, a frantic litany lost beneath the roaring surge of blood in my ears. In that crucible moment, a decision forged itself. Instead of veering onto the ramp, I slammed the brakes and wrenched the wheel hard right. Physics took hold. The car spun in a sickening gyre, tires screaming protest against the abused asphalt. Silas slammed against the passenger door, the gun momentarily jarred from his grasp. We jolted to a halt, broadside across the lanes, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Before Silas could reorient, instinct propelled me. Seatbelt unlatched, door flung open, I tumbled onto the roadway, scrambling to my feet. Help! The cry tore from my lungs as I waved frantically at the rapidly approaching constellation of police lights. He's armed. He has a gun. The aftermath unfolded in a chaotic montage. Blinding strobes, shouted directives, the cold, impersonal clasp of handcuffs securing both Silas and temporarily me. Only later, swaddled in the coarse embrace of a shock blanket in the back of a cruiser, did the brutal reality begin to crystallize. Silas, it transpired, was a ghost haunting the highways, wanted for a spree of armed robberies spanning 3 states. He'd been using unsuspecting drivers, charitable souls like myself, as unwitting escape vectors. Had I not executed that desperate split-second maneuver, my destination might have been a ditch, or worse. Hours bled away under the sterile glare of interrogation lights, recounting every detail, every nuance of the encounter. By the time they released me, dawn was painting the eastern horizon with delicate washes of rose and gold, a beauty rendered surreal, almost offensive by the night's horrors. An officer escorted me to the impound lot where my violated vehicle awaited. Sliding behind the wheel, a tidal wave of conflicting emotions crashed over me, relief so profound it felt like pain, simmering anger, stark fear, and a bewildered gratitude. My hands trembled on the wheel, the phantom weight of Silas's weapon, a chilling imprint on my psyche. I sat motionless for a long while, the ignition key cold in my palm. The night replayed relentlessly, my foolish trust, his escalating panic, the glint of the gun. How could I have been so monumentally naive? My self-perception as a shrewd judge of character lay shattered. Finally, drawing a ragged breath, I turned the key. The engine's familiar rumble offered a small solace in the quiet dawn. Pulling out onto the street, I forged a silent covenant. No more roadside Samaritans, no more investing blind faith in the faces of strangers. The highway stretched before me, an empty invitation, but as I merged, the world felt irrevocably altered, imbued with a latent menace. Every passing vehicle harbored potential danger. Every rest stop whispered of ambush. I drove relentlessly through the day, fueled by caffeine and adrenaline's dregs, pulling into my own driveway as dusk mirrored the dawn. 36 hours without sleep, yet rest felt impossible luxury. Unlocking my front door, the sheer normalcy within, the furniture, the familiar scents, struck a discordant note. This was the home I'd left, but I was not the same man returning. That night, Lying rigid in bed, eyes fixed on the unseen ceiling, Silas's face swam in the darkness. What cascade of choices had deposited him on that desolate roadside? And what about my own journey? How many other unseen precipices had I navigated blissfully unaware? In the ensuing weeks, shadows danced with newfound malevolence. Every interaction with an unfamiliar face became a cautious calculation. The inherent dangers of the world, once an abstract concept, now felt visceral, intimately personal. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to mend. Therapy provided tools. A home security system offered a semblance of control. Self-defense classes rebuilt a fragile confidence. Incrementally, I reclaimed fragments of my former trust, my sense of place. But the scar remains. Each time I pass a figure by the roadside, thumb outstretched, a vestigial pang of guilt twists within me. Then the memory surfaces, the cold dread, the muzzle inches from my skull, and my foot presses harder on the accelerator. Some lessons, etched in terror, are indelible, and some kindnesses, tragically, are best left unperformed. "2:47 a.m. Tuesday. A phantom weight settled onto the passenger side, triggering the sensor light, a tiny, insistent orange eye blinking on the console. Reflexively, my gaze flickered to the rear view, then snapped right. Nothing but worn upholstery and the rain-slicked emptiness of the Chicago night reflected in the window. Yet the dashboard swore blind someone. Precisely 143 pounds of someone occupied the seat beside me. My name's Silas, and I haunt the city's arteries by night, a ferryman for the digital age, piloting my sedan for the twin gods of Uber and Lyft. 8 years navigating this concrete labyrinth exposes you to the spectrum of human frailty. Collegiate bacchanals, lovers' quarrels sharp enough to draw blood, the quiet implosion of minds lost in the urban sprawl. This, however, felt other. My phone pulsed with a fare. Elara Vance, 1894. A tap on her profile yielded only digital smoke. User not found. It began under the stony gaze of the old water tower on Michigan Avenue. A cold October drizzle wept from the sky, the kind that seeps past fabric and skin to chill the marrow. My last fare deposited, the siren song of home beckoning, the request had chimed. A stellar 4.97 rating glowed beside the name. The pickup pin landed exactly where my car idled, engine humming a low threnody against the rhythmic sigh of the wipers. 5 minutes I waited, the streetlights bleeding onto the wet asphalt. No one materialized. Just as my thumb hovered over the cancel icon, the sensor flared to life. A glitch, surely? These vehicles endure a nightly crucifixion, systems fray. I reached across, pressing my palm into the passenger seat cushion. It yielded, compressing unnervingly, as if against unseen substance. When I withdrew my hand, the indentation lingered, a ghost of pressure before slowly, reluctantly smoothing itself out. Anyone there? The words sounded hollow, absurd in the confines of the car. Abruptly, the air turned glacial. My breath plumed, a visible cloud in the sudden chill. I fumbled for my phone, stabbing at the cancel button. The app refused, stubbornly refreshing, the navigation already charting a course through the sleeping city towards Lincoln Park. Sanity would dictate abandoning the vehicle, calling it quits. But alimony gnaws and tuition fees loom like thunderheads. The fare beckoned, and truth be told, a sliver of morbid curiosity, honed over 8 years of nocturnal oddities, had lodged itself under my ribs. Nothing like this had ever crossed my path. Shifting into drive, I eased away from the curb. The sensor light remained stubbornly lit, a miniature sentinel on the dash. Every few blocks, my eyes darted sideways. Empty seat, invisible burden. 143 pounds of nothing. The route guided me north along Lakeshore Drive. At 3 a.m., the asphalt ribbon lay deserted. The vast, dark water of the lake, an unseen presence to my right, its waves composing a restless percussion against the breakwater. Rain drummed a heavier rhythm on the roof. The cabin temperature plummeted further. Cranking the heat yielded nothing against the encroaching cold. A tremor started in my hands, clamped tight on the wheel. Nerves, I told myself, just the cold. The radio dissolved into a blizzard of static, resisting all attempts to find a clear station, cycling endlessly through white noise. Fullerton Avenue peeled away from the drive, plunging us into streets shadowed by skeletal trees, their branches clawing at the sky. Ancient brownstones brooded on either flank. The navigation commanded a halt before a 3-story Victorian sentinel, a relic seemingly untouched since gaslight illuminated its windows. It stood utterly dark, paint flaking like sunburnt skin, windows blinded with plywood, skeletal vines strangling its facade. A no trespassing sign sagged drunkenly on a wrought iron fence. My phone insisted, destination reached. End ride? I ventured into the icy air. Silence answered. The sensor light stayed on. Later, property records unearthed the truth. Abandoned since 1894. A fire. The owner, Alara Vance, 27, perished within. Her body never recovered. With a groan that echoed down the decades, the house's front door swung inward, revealing not light, but an absolute swallowing blackness. Simultaneously, the passenger sensor clicked off. Warmth flooded back into the car, chasing the unnatural chill. I sat frozen, engine idling, wipers still sweeping, for a long, suspended moment. Finally, summoning courage, I checked the back. Empty. But on the passenger seat, where the pressure had been, lay a single pearl button, ancient and yellowed, the kind sewn onto bridal gowns in the late 19th century. I drove home on autopilot, called in sick the following day. Hours vanished into online archives, chasing the phantom of Alara Vance. An old news clipping surfaced. The fire, the missing body. Mention of her last sighting, stepping into a carriage late at night, adorned in her wedding dress. Her nuptials were scheduled for the following morning. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm driving again, though Lincoln Park after midnight is now forbidden territory on my internal map. Sometimes, when the rain falls just so, the sensor flickers, a brief, ghostly wink. The pearl button resides in my glove compartment, a tangible anchor to an impossible memory. Proof, perhaps only to myself. Last night, another summons. A different name, Clara Bellwood, but the same frustrating user not found error. The pickup point, the water tower again. I canceled instantly, logged off. Some fares carry too high a price. The empty seat haunts my thoughts, the memory of that specific weight. 143 LABs. 8 years I've driven these streets, believing I'd witnessed the full scope of Chicago's Nocturnal theater. I was profoundly mistaken. A trip to the Harold Washington Library yielded more fragments. Ilara Vance wasn't merely a fire victim. Her fiancé faced scrutiny for her disappearance. Charges never materialized. Bloodstains in his carriage, but no corpse. The prevailing theory: he murdered her, the fire a convenient cremation. The Fullerton house wasn't hers. It belonged to him. The blaze originated in the basement, where investigators found grim evidence: chains bolted to stone, desperate scratches clawed into wooden support beams. His alibi was airtight, out of town. A week after my spectral fare, curiosity propelled me past the address in daylight. Only a vacant lot remained, scarred earth and weeds where the Victorian should have stood. City records confirmed its demolition in 1975, but the image burned behind my eyes: the peeling paint, the boarded windows, the door creaking open onto darkness. I know what I saw. Things have shifted since Ilara. The sensor activates more frequently now, always late, always when I'm alone. The familiar chill descends, the radio crackles into oblivion, but the weight varies. 160 bulbs, 118, 175 bulbs. Different names flash on the screen, different pickup points, leading to destinations that exist only in memory. Spectral addresses superimposed on modern landscapes, houses long returned to dust. Last night, I collected a historian from the Chicago History Museum. Casually, I steered the conversation towards 19th century disappearances. Her eyes lit with academic fervor. It was her precise area of research. Dozens, she said. Young women vanishing throughout the 1890s. Last seen climbing into carriages under the cloak of night. None ever found. The passenger sensor just illuminated 136 LBS. The app shows a request for Eleanor Hayes, 1891. Outside, the first drops of rain begin to speckle the windshield. The temperature is already falling. My phone's navigation glows, plotting a route towards the old Stockyards district, a place steeped in grim history. Every rational instinct screams, go offline, drive home, lock the door, forget. But the faces flicker in my mind: Ilara, Clara, Eleanor, the nameless others. Decades spent unheard, unseen, unfound. Perhaps that's what this is. A search, continuing across time, looking for someone, anyone, to finally hear their stories. The sensor remains lit, a subtle shift in the seat, as if an unseen passenger adjusted their position. Through the radio's static hiss, a thread of sound emerges, faint, possibly a voice, impossibly distant. The navigation waits. I engage the gear shift. Some fares, you understand, are non-negotiable, regardless of the destination. Easing away from the curb, my eyes drift again to the passenger seat, still vacant. But now something new. Minuscule droplets of moisture purling on the leather, like phantom tears shed by invisible eyes. The dashboard clock displays 2:47 a.m. The city sleeps around me, oblivious. Ahead lie dark, empty streets, leading toward a past I'm increasingly unsure I want to confront. Yet I drive on, because perhaps these women need more than transport. Perhaps they need a witness, someone to acknowledge the crime of their erasure, to affirm they walked these streets, they breathed this air, they mattered, that they are not forgotten. The navigation directs me left, deeper into the skeletal remains of the industrial district. Warehouses loom like sleeping giants, brick behemoths from a bygone century. The rain intensifies, drumming insistently. The radio static coalesces, sharpens. Are those words? Is that weeping? Time check. 3:33 a.m. The sensor readout flickers, settles at 139 lbcs. And through the static, clearer now, a single spectral word. Please. Ahead, the destination resolves from the rain-lashed gloom, an old warehouse. But something is profoundly wrong. It doesn't look derelict. Through the watery veil on my windshield, it appears solid, intact, windows faintly luminous, hinting at activity within, as it might have looked in 1891. The sensor clicks off. Warmth rushes back. The radio falls silent. On the passenger seat rests another pearl button, twin to Ilara's, and beside it, a small brittle square of yellowed paper, an unfamiliar newspaper clipping. Eleanor Hayes, 19, missing. Last seen entering warehouse district late Tuesday night. Reward offered. I idle there, the wipers battling the downpour, the engine a low pulse in the unnatural quiet. Finally, my hand reaches across, gathers the button, the clipping. They join the growing archive in my glove compartment, tangible evidence of intangible passengers, proof that some narratives refuse oblivion. The navigation screen is dark. The warehouse ahead has reverted, slumped back into its modern decay, windows shattered, doors gaping. But I know now. Answers linger within those crumbling walls, truth buried beneath layers of time and silence. Prudence urges retreat, a return to the familiar world of flesh and blood fares and predictable routes. But the pull is too strong. Tomorrow night or the night after, another name will surface. Another weight will press into the seat. Another chapter waiting to be read aloud. For now, reverse gear, back towards the city lights, the illusion of normalcy. But the buttons, the clippings, they remain. Tokens of passage. Every activation of that sensor will now carry a heavier significance. Perhaps this is why they chose my car, my route. Not merely for transport, but for testimony, to bear witness. The rain softens as I near home, but the night's true weight lingers. Somewhere in the sleeping city, more stories wait, more lost women seek passage. And when 2:47 a.m. rolls around again, that small orange light might bloom once more. I'll be driving, watching, collecting fragments of forgotten lives, because maybe that's the fair remembrance. The streets of my neighborhood are deserted, but the emptiness feels different now, charged with unseen presence. A final check in the rearview mirror. A flicker? A shape in the back seat. The silhouette of a woman in archaic dress, pearl buttons catching the streetlight's gleam. Blink, and it's gone. Empty. Tomorrow night, the engine will turn over. The app will go live. I'll wait for the chime, for the impossible name, for the weight in the empty seat. Ready to learn what became of them, one spectral ride at a time. In this city, some ghosts don't rattle chains. They request a ride. They seek a voice. They ask only to be remembered. The passenger seat sensor just flickered. Time to go back to work. "6 months now, this sanctuary has been mine. Initially, its appeal was primal, the sweep of open terrain, nights profound with quiet, the neighboring forest a beckoning wilderness for aimless wandering. Formal trails held little charm. I preferred the pathless routes, the yielding earth beneath my boots, the pauses dedicated solely to the forest's breath rustling through leaves. A man of simple tastes, I crave untainted air, the loamy scent of damp ground. These were sustenance enough. Yet scarcely a week into my residency, phenomena began to stir, things utterly defiant of explanation. The seventh dawn found me adrift, subtly out of sync. Nothing acute, merely a dull throb behind the eyes, an odd fullness pressuring my ears. A walk, I reasoned, would purge the malaise. Jacket donned, I stepped into the morning air, drifting towards the tree line. Above, the sky stretched a canvas of flat, indifferent gray. A cool breeze skimmed my face. The trees stood sentinel, ordinary in their stoicism, branches alive with the flitting of birds. Beneath my tread, desiccated leaves crackled, marking the faint indentation my previous passages had worn. Gradually, the headache receded. My breathing found its rhythm. Perhaps, I mused, it was only the residue of a troubled sleep. Then a whisper brushed the air. I froze. It bore a faint resemblance to my name, yet lacked certainty. Motionless, I strained to capture it again, only the wind sighing through the boughs, a sound like a soft exhalation. My name did not repeat. A shrug dismissed it. The wind plays tricks. For another quarter hour, I pushed onward. The earlier discomfort had faded to a mere trace, a phantom ache. Deep inhalations drew in the fragrance of wet earth. Sated for the morning, I turned homeward. All seemed utterly mundane. The following day, the 8th of my stay, an inexplicable vigilance took hold. I found myself constantly glancing back, a knot of baseless anxiety tightening in my gut. On the back porch, a book lay open but unread, my restlessness mounting. Setting it aside, I rose, my gaze drawn to the forest's edge. Another walk then. Perhaps movement would soothe the inner turmoil. Entering the woods, I consciously slackened my shoulders, slowed my breath. After some time, it returned, clearer now, a low, sibilant murmur that stretched my name into something unfamiliar. Ice traced patterns across my scalp, my throat constricted. I pivoted. Emptiness greeted me. A few heartbeats pulsed in the silence before the whisper sounded once more, emanating from deeper within the woods. The wind, I insisted internally, yet the sound lacked randomness. It felt intentional, like a summons whispered by a person or something other. My pulse hammered. A clammy dampness licked my palms. Despite the fear, a strange magnetism pulled me forward. Imagination. I chided myself, even as the sound became impossible to ignore. I pressed deeper, navigating thicker tangles of undergrowth. The air grew palpably colder, my jacket suddenly inadequate. Again, the whisper, perpetually faint, hovering at the very periphery of audibility. I noted the way sunlight fractured and dimmed beneath the dense canopy. A chill caressed the nape of my neck. Muscles along my spine bunched tight. I I continued, pushing aside branches with a forearm until I stumbled upon a path, ancient and neglected by the look of it. Unmarked, overgrown, its edges defined by moss-slicked stones. Here, the whisper intensified. My heartbeat resonated, a frantic beat in my chest, echoing in my ears. I followed this spectral trail for perhaps 10 minutes, maybe 15. Time blurred, thought narrowed to a single point. Discover the source of the call. No people crossed my path. No wildlife stirred. The silence felt unnaturally profound, broken only by the crunch of my steps and my own shallow, strained breathing. Then the woods relented, opening into a clearing. At its heart stood a circle of stones, waist high, arranged in stark perfection. Each stone wore a thick mantle of green moss, some bearing archaic markings, carvings weathered by untold seasons. Grooves and lines hinted at meaning, but offered no translation my eyes could grasp. My stomach coiled. The instant I breached the clearing's edge, the whispers ceased. I stood, scanning the perimeter. Towering trees encircled the space, their interlaced branches obscuring much of the sky, casting the area in perpetual twilight. The cold intensified. My breath plumed in faint clouds. This silence wasn't peaceful. It felt heavy, weighted, as if the clearing existed within a pocket sealed off from the world beyond. My heart slammed against my ribs. My skin prickled with apprehension. Hesitantly, I approached the ring. My boots sank into the soft, damp ground. Bending, I laid a hand on one of the stones. Its surface was rough, cool, and moist. My finger traced a carved line, feeling the sharp edges beneath the moss. A glance over my shoulder revealed nothing, yet the sensation of being watched prickled my skin. Somewhere behind me, a branch snapped with sudden violence. I spun, fists clenched instinctively. Nothing. Stillness descended again, absolute. My breath hitched in short, sharp gasps. My pulse throbbed in my ears. An involuntary twitch danced at the corner of my left eye. Then, a soft rustle, like fabric dragging across the forest floor. I turned again. Still nothing visible, but the fine hairs on my arms rose. A clammy sheen broke out on my forehead. I retreated from the stone circle, careful never to turn my back fully on the clearing. My feet tangled on unseen roots, yet somehow I kept my balance. An overwhelming compulsion to leave surged through me. I don't belong here, I muttered, the words trembling, alien even to my own ears. I fled the clearing, retracing the overgrown path at a near run. The cold air bit at my face. Sweat trickled from my temples despite the chill. Every few strides, my head jerked back, scanning the looming trees on either side. Above, the wind quickened, coaxing groans and creaks from the straining branches. Eventually, the terrain grew familiar. I recognized the fallen log beside the small stream I often followed. I didn't slow until I burst from the trees into the relative safety of my own backyard. Stepping onto the porch, I expelled a long, shuddering breath. My shoulders sagged, releasing tension held for what felt like an eternity. A dull ache persisted in my chest. Sleep offered no refuge that night. Closing my eyes conjured immediate visions of the stone circle, the cryptic carvings swimming in the darkness behind my lids. I recalled the oppressive quiet of that place. Tossing, turning, my mouth perpetually dry, I listened to the nocturnal chorus of insects, each chirp and buzz jarring my frayed nerves. Eventually, I sought solace on the living room couch, a small lamp casting frail light against the shadows. Around 3 in the morning, I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, heart pounding violently. For a disorienting moment, I thought I heard my name whispered again from the deepest corner of the room. My eyes darted wildly until the solitude reasserted itself. I forced myself back to bed, but sleep remained a shallow, troubled state. In the ensuing days, I attempted normalcy, busying myself with minor repairs, a loose cabinet hinge, a protesting floorboard. I mowed the meager patch of lawn, anything to occupy my mind, but comfort remained elusive. Every glance towards the tree line at the property's edge brought a familiar clenching in my stomach. The woods seemed to issue a silent summons, an insistent pull I felt even without hearing the whispers. My nerves remained perpetually frayed, my appetite waned. I found myself losing minutes, sometimes longer, simply staring out the window, lost in uneasy contemplation. On the 10th day, defiance warred with fear. I resolved not to be ruled by this creeping dread. Pulling on sturdy boots, I pocketed a flashlight, a concession to anxiety despite the midday sun, and ventured back into the forest. Initially, I kept to the more defined path. The ground felt solid, the air rich with the scent of pine. Birdsong offered a fragile counterpoint to my unease. A measure of calm returned, but as I veered deeper, the familiar chill descended once more. Ahead, I discerned the faint track leading towards the stone circle. I hesitated, a dull ache blooming in my chest. Just a daytime look, I rationalized. To find a logical explanation, old boundary markers perhaps, a forgotten local folly. My pragmatic mind craved a mundane answer. Reaching the clearing, I found the circle unchanged, immutable. If anything, the moss seemed thicker, greener. The carvings retained their inscrutable silence. The profound quiet held sway. I circled the perimeter slowly, my boots crunching softly on the yielding earth. Small, half-buried stones littered the ground near the main ring. I stooped, picking one up. It lay smooth and cool in my palm, marked by a peculiar groove. I replaced it carefully, and then the sensation returned, eyes boring into my back. I whirled around, heart leaping. Empty space, trees, dappled light, yet the presence felt undeniable. My throat tightened, a fine tremor started in my hands. I took a step back. Hello? The word emerged weak, swallowed by the stillness. Silence answered, save for a faint ringing in my ears. The tension in my neck became a painful knot. A few more cautious steps around the stones. Now I detected a faint odor beneath the damp earthiness, something metallic, almost like old blood. My stomach churned. I clicked on the flashlight, incongruous in the daylight, and aimed its beam at the carvings, seeking clarity. Spirals, lattices, jagged lines, patterns utterly alien. As the beam swept across the stones, a shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. My head snapped sideways. Nothing but tree trunks met my gaze. A surge of raw fear constricted my chest. I extinguished the flashlight, standing rigid, acutely aware of my own ragged breathing. Minutes stretched, taut and unbearable. Finally, I broke. I left a clearing, my pace quickening to a near jog along the path. My legs felt unsteady, my lungs burned. Thoughts raced, chaotic and fearful. Back at the house, I secured the locks, a daytime absurdity that felt utterly necessary. I stood in the living room, panting, sweat cooling unpleasantly under my shirt. My hands shook as I poured water, gulping it down. The television offered distraction, but focus proved impossible. That evening, I consulted a local hiking guide discovered amongst the cabin's effects, searching for any mention of stone circles, ancient carvings, anomalous clearings. Nothing. The guide detailed only established trails and recognized scenic points, silent on hidden histories. Frustration mingled with rising anxiety. The headache returned, that familiar pressure building behind my ears. Drawn to the window, I peered into the deepening darkness. The forest had seemed to pulse with unseen life. I watched, waiting for a betraying flicker of light, a hint of movement. A brief shimmer caught my eye, or perhaps it was merely imagination playing on strained nerves. My pulse quickened. I retreated from the glass. The next morning, I forced down breakfast, eggs, toast, weary of the constant tension. A final walk, I decided. One last attempt to prove this was all subjective, a product of isolation and nerves. Around noon, I set out, deliberately staying within the more open, familiar stretches of the woods. I focused on tactile sensations, the rough bark of a pine, the springy moss underfoot. I strained to hear only the genuine sounds, birdsong, the true voice of the wind, telling myself nothing else existed. Yet with every step, the feeling persisted. Something unseen trailed behind me. Each turn revealed only trees, branches, shifting patterns of light and shadow. But the chill remained crawling down my spine. My limbs felt leaden, my stomach unsettled. No whispers this time, but the presence was palpable, an invisible weight on the back of my neck. My breathing grew shallow, my legs stiff with reluctance. I hurried back towards the house. By the time I reached the yard, my heart hammered so intensely I could feel the frantic pulse in my wrists. Leaning against the cabin wall, I closed my eyes, my throat raw from exertion. Since that day, the forest is no longer a place of solace. To step beneath its canopy is to feel an instant drop in temperature, a pervasive chill that sinks into the skin. My eyes constantly dart, scanning for motion in the periphery. Faint rustles, the snap of a twig, sounds that might be footsteps or breathing. They haunt the edges of my hearing. Occasionally, that faint metallic tang taints the air. My body remains coiled, perpetually tense. A ringing persists in my ears. My mouth dries. I force myself forward sometimes, arguing internally. It's just the woods, it's nerves, but the fear clings, tenacious. Back within a thin security of the house, the windows stay locked, especially after dusk. I sit, often in silence, listening, branches scraping the roof, the wind rattling a loose shutter, ordinary sounds now imbued with menace, each capable of making my heart leap. The darkness outside feels dense, so watchful. I feel pinned by an unseen gaze. Morning brings a fleeting moment of relief, instantly shattered by the remembrance of where I am. No logical explanation presents itself. No evidence of human interference surfaces. No local lore speaks of this stone circle. A departure has crossed my mind repeatedly, yet my savings are sunk into the soil, this structure. This was meant to be my retreat, my haven. Instead, it morphs, day by day, into something else entirely. Every foray into the woods now carries the certainty of being followed. The chill climbs my back. My nerves tighten like wires. I know this isn't mere imagination, yet proof remains elusive. All I can do is maintain vigilance, try not to let the unseen presence drive me away completely. For now, I remain. Some mornings, I still walk the woods, glancing over my shoulder with compulsive frequency. I listen for the whispers that may or may not come. My eyes scan the trees, anticipating movement that never fully reveals itself. My heart pounds, sweat sometimes breaks on my skin. Yet I persist, partly from a stubborn desire to understand, or perhaps to witness the culmination, partly from a desperate hope that it is all just nerves, and partly from a chilling curiosity about what truly waits out there, concealed amongst the moss-draped stones and the silent, watchful branches, perhaps waiting for me to venture closer one last time. This is the narrative of my sanctuary thus far, tense, unsettling, but undeniably mine. And for the time being, I am not leaving. The day had bled Elias dry, leaving him a husk needing just moments of stillness before the trek home. He slipped into the train station restroom, a forgotten alcove few ever sought. Near midnight, the station breathed vacancy, vast and echoing with the ghost of distant footfalls. Relief washed over him, cool and welcome. All he craved was the sting of cold water on his face, a brief ablution to shed the accumulated weight of hours. Inside, the air hung thick and stale. Fluorescent tubes sputtered overhead, casting a jittery, jaundiced light across cracked porcelain and weeping grout. A low, insistent hum vibrated just beneath the threshold of hearing. Elias chose a stall, the click of a lock echoing unnaturally loud in the quiet. He sagged against the metal door, eyes closed, seeking oblivion in the manufactured solitude. Then, a sound, a faint, dry friction outside, like worn leather whispering over tile. He went rigid, senses flaring. Silence rushed back in, thick and absolute, save for the buzzing lights. Perhaps another soul as weary as he, seeking refuge. He let the tension ebb, sinking back into the momentary peace. It returned, not a whisper this time, but a distinct, slow scrape. Something solid, something dense, being dragged across the floor, methodically nearing his flimsy sanctuary. Elias's eyes snapped open. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden stillness. He peered down at the gap beneath the door, seeing only the grimy, indifferent tiles. The grating sound persisted, measured, deliberate, closing the distance. Breath held captive in his lungs, hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. He willed himself invisible. Don't let them know. A shadow, thin and stark, slid into view along the floor, stretching, nearing. Then, impossibly, a dark curve intruded into the narrow space. It sharpened, resolved into the cold, unblinking eye of a camera lens, pressed low against the tiles, aimed directly at him. A hand, disembodied, held it steady. Raw panic surged, hot and suffocating. His pulse roared in his ears, surely loud enough to betray him. Thought dissolved. What to do? Silence was paramount, yet fear clawed at his throat. With excruciating slowness, he lifted his feet from the floor, bracing himself against the stall's cold partition, shrinking away. The lens remained a fixed, malevolent point of observation, waiting. Waiting for what? A reaction? A scream? An eternity condensed into seconds before the lens retracted, vanishing as abruptly as it had appeared. A ragged, trembling breath escaped Elias's lips. His hands shook, gripping the metal sides for support. He strained his ears, listening for any telltale sound, any clue. Nothing, only the pervasive hum. Gathering a fragile courage, he breathed deep, trying to quell the frantic rhythm in his chest. His mind raced, conjuring images of the watcher lurking just beyond the door. Leaving felt impossible, staying equally so. Carefully, minimizing every sound, he turned the lock. The mechanism's soft snicks seemed thunderous. He eased the door open a mere sliver, peering through the gap. Empty. The buzzing lights, the stained sinks, the cracked mirror reflecting only the vacant space. He stepped out tentatively, every nerve alight, scanning the room. A flicker of movement in the far corner, shrouded in deeper shadow. A figure stood there, utterly still, observing. The face was lost to the gloom, but the posture was rigid, intent. Elias's stomach plummeted as he saw the faint luminescence of a phone screen held low in their hand, recording. A wave of icy dreads rooted him to the spot. Run. The command screamed in his mind, but his legs were lead. He could only stare, trapped in the unseen gaze. Without preamble, the figure stepped forward, detaching itself from the shadows. A glimpse of a face, pale, utterly devoid of expression, with eyes that seemed to pierce the intervening distance, pinning him. No words, no sound, just another deliberate step closer, the unwavering stare locking onto his. Instinct finally broke the paralysis. Elias spun, bolting for the exit. His shoes slapped frantically against the tiles, the sound swallowed by the restroom's hard surfaces, then amplified in the cavernous station beyond. He heard pursuit, not frantic, like his own flight, but measured, steady, terrifyingly unhurried. He burst onto the deserted platform, eyes darting wildly, searching for any sign of life, any witness, any help. Only the distant whine of unseen machinery answered. He didn't stop, didn't dare look back until he was clear of the station, spilling onto the empty street, lungs burning, gasping for air. He risked a glance over his shoulder. Nothing. The station entrance gaped, dark and silent, betraying no trace of the encounter. A vibration against his thigh made him flinch violently. His phone, hands trembling, he fumbled it from his pocket. One new message, unknown number. A chill, colder than the night air, traced its way down his spine as he read the illuminated words, "Nice to see you." Nausea churned within him. Who? How? The disembodied eyes from the screen seemed to bore into him again. He deleted the message, powered down the phone, and walked. Each footstep was a conscious effort, each shadow a potential threat. He felt watched, a palpable presence clinging to him like a second skin. Sleep offered no sanctuary that night. Every settling groan of the apartment building, every distant siren jolted him awake, heart pounding, convinced they were outside. He checked the locks, peered through the peephole into the empty hall, secured the window latches. The feeling persisted, an invisible weight pressing in. Days bled into a week. Elias tried to rationalize, to dismiss it as a sick prank, a one-off encounter with some disturbed individual. Then another message, another unknown number, this time a picture, him captured from behind, walking down a familiar street, utterly oblivious. Terror, stark and visceral, seized him. He hadn't seen anyone. How? They were still there, still watching. The messages became a drip feed of violation. Photos taken through windows, notes detailing his clothes, his routes, snippets of overheard conversations. Paranoia became his constant companion. Every stranger's glance felt loaded. Every reflection seemed to hold a hidden observer. He went to the police, displayed the chilling digital trail. Sympathy, but no action, not enough evidence, they said. He changed his number. He found a new apartment across town. He altered his commute, his habits, desperately trying to sever the invisible thread. It was useless. The messages always found him, relentless reminders that escape was an illusion. Even now, the phone on the table vibrates. Another notification slides onto the screen. Another message has arrived. Folly, sheer folly, to imagine anything worthwhile could emerge from that suffocating little curio shop burrowed into Rookery Alley. Its windows, filmed with the grime of ages, and a sign bleached skeletal by sun and rain, offered no promise of reputable dealings. Yet the mirror, the mirror snagged my gaze the instant I ambled past. Leaning against a shop front, half concealed by a precarious ziggurat of scuffed leather valises, it commanded attention. I paused, pressing my face close to the dusty pane. Dark mahogany framed it, etched with labyrinthine geometries that seemed to spiral inwards, pulling the eye into their depths. The glass possessed that subtle, aqueous warp characteristic of antiquity, lending reflections a distortion just shy of the grotesque, making them strangely compelling. A void yawned on my living room wall. This artifact felt preordained. A discordant jangle from the bell overhead announced my entry. The air hung thick, a composite perfume of decaying timber, brittle paper, and some other unplaceable organic decay. Narrow confines, passages barely navigable between teetering stacks of forgotten things. From behind a towering armoire materialized the proprietor, wiping gnarled hands on a rag. Elderly, perhaps deep into his 7th decade, with spectacles thick as bottle bases and sparse, silvered hair. The looking glass, I managed, gesturing windowward. Its price? He afforded it a cursory glance, then appraised me. 900. A short, sharp laugh escaped me. For that relic? Absurd. 850, he countered, his tone devoid of inflection. 19th century, frame carved by hand. A brief, perfunctory haggle ensued, culminating in my reluctant agreement to 700, far exceeding my budget, yet some insistent magnetism emanating from the mirror forbade retreat. He assisted me, surprisingly spry for his years, in maneuvering it towards my vehicle, handling the object with a reverence that seemed almost proprietary. Best keep it veiled when not observed, he murmured as we wrestled it into the boot. Sunlight damages the wood. I nodded absently, my mind already arranging its placement. The wall opposite my sofa cried out for adornment, and the mirror would capture the window light, amplifying the room's perceived dimensions. Mounting it that evening proved an ordeal. The weight was deceptive, demanding an hour of strained effort, necessitating a second attempt with stronger wall anchors to ensure its stability. By completion, my shoulders screamed protest. My hands sported a constellation of minor lacerations from the frame's sharp intricacies, but it hung there, perfect, transformative. I sank onto the sofa, beer in hand, admiring the way its surface drank the warm glow of the floor lamp. The frame's geometric carvings threw peculiar dancing shadows, while the glass's subtle undulations rendered my familiar living room into something akin to an impressionist canvas. That was when the first anomaly registered. A mere flicker, glimpsed at the periphery of the reflected scene, like a swift passage. I spun around. Nothing. Just the vacant room, undisturbed. Another draught of beer. Tired eyes, I reasoned. Tricks of the light. The subsequent days unfolded with unremarkable rhythm. Work, home, television, the comforting cadence of routine. The mirror assimilated, becoming mere decor. Occasionally, passing it, I'd catch my own image, adjust my posture, smooth my hair, mundane interactions, until Wednesday night. Sofa-bound again, the drone of a sports commentary, a backdrop to mindless phone scrolling. Movement again in the glass. Sharper this time. A definite silhouette, human-scaled, traversing the reflected space from edge to edge. My head snapped back, neck cracking audibly. Emptiness. The apartment silent, still. A frantic pulse hammered against my ribs. I rose, compelled to search every room, a futile exercise knowing my solitude. Doors secured, windows latched, nothing amiss. Returning, I stood before the mirror, scrutinizing my reflection, the room captured behind me. All appeared normal, save for the slight warping inherent in the antique glass. I nearly persuaded myself of hallucination. Nearly. But the phenomenon recurred the following night, and the night after. Always while seated on the sofa, always detected obliquely. Dark forms flitting across the mirrored background, sometimes solitary, sometimes in pairs or trios. Vanishing the instant direct gaze fell upon them. I began chronicling the occurrences, seeking a pattern. Activity peaked between 8 p.m. and midnight. Dim lighting seemed conducive. No sound ever accompanied them, and a disturbing boldness was emerging. A week after installation, engrossed in a novel, I perceived one of the forms halt mid-transit within the reflection. Simply pause and stand. I forced my eyes to remain fixed on the printed page, my heart a frantic drum against my sternum. From the corner of my vision, it persisted, a dark, man-shaped void, utterly motionless in the mirrored room. It lingered for an eternity compressed into minutes. When the tension became unbearable, I looked up, gone. Sleep became fragmented, elusive. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the building jolted me into hyper-awareness. The notion, a haunted mirror, sounded ludicrous, yet the evidence of my senses was undeniable. The shapes gained clarity, definition. Their movements acquired purpose, shifting from mere passage to apparent observation. Sometimes, A fleeting glimpse suggested one had turned, facing my reflection, watching. One night, I draped a sheet over it. The visual intrusions ceased, but a faint, persistent rustling emanated from behind the fabric, though the air in the room remained perfectly still. 3 days later, steeling myself, I pulled the sheet away. The glass seemed darker, imbued with a residue of the obscurity it had concealed. I tried the antique shop's number, disconnected. A drive past Rookery Alley revealed windows obscured by brown paper, a for lease sign taped to the door. The old man, Silas, had vanished, taking with him any clue to the mirror's provenance. The internet offered cold comfort. Tales of cursed looking glasses abounded, lurid fictions bearing no resemblance to my quiet, creeping dread. No information surfaced regarding mirrors with analogous frames, those unsettling geometric patterns. Last night marked a new nadir of terror. Dozing on the sofa, some instinct prized my eyes open. Within the mirror, directly behind my reflected self, stood a figure, taller than the others, it's darker, possessing a terrifying solidity. My own image remained clear, but this entity behind it was an absolute negation, a person-shaped hole punched through reality. I was paralyzed, breath caught in my throat. The figure lifted what might have been an arm, extending it towards my reflection's shoulder. Simultaneously, I felt it, an intense, localized coldness on my own shoulder, like the press of ice through my shirt. My airway constricted. The room began to tilt. Then, salvation in shrill tones. My phone rang, shattering the tableau. The figure dissolved. I scrambled backward off the sofa, gulping air. My sister, Chloe, inquiring about weekend arrangements. Never had a mundane call felt so profoundly rescuing. I spent the remainder of the night in my car. Re-entering that room, facing what might wait within the glass, was unthinkable. This morning, feigning illness to avoid work, I searched for removal services. But the mirror's sheer mass defied my solitary efforts, and the explanation required felt insurmountable. So here I sit, nursing lukewarm coffee in a generic cafe, documenting this madness, wrestling with options. Prudence dictates abandoning the apartment, leaving the mirror to its next victim. Yet that feels unconscionable. Besides, a chilling certainty grows. These presences, whatever they are, have fixed their interest upon me. They might follow. Dusk approaches. The decision looms. Return home or seek refuge in a motel. My phone vibrates, Chloe again. Worry tightening her digital voice, no doubt, since I never returned her call. I should answer, confess everything, but the inevitable diagnosis looms. Delusion, madness. Yet the shapes are real. The glacial touch on my shoulder was real. Knowing doesn't diminish the terror. My coffee is stone cold. The barista casts glances freighted with concern. I've occupied this table for hours. Through the cafe window, my car squats in the emptying lot. I could drive there now, stride into my apartment, wrench that damnable mirror from the wall, drag it out, shattered or whole, eradicate it. But what if that's precisely their aim? What if dismantling its physical form unleashes something worse? Another vibration, a text from Chloe. Where are you? I'm at your place. My hands begin to tremble violently. She's there, now, in that living room, likely standing before the mirror. Keys clutched, I bolt for the car. The drive is a blur of violated speed limits, sweat beading on my palms gripping the wheel. I burst through my apartment door, shouting her name. She stands in the living room, glancing up from her phone, startled. Elias? There you are. Tried calling all day. You okay? My gaze flies to the mirror. Chloe's reflection stares back, perfectly ordinary. No attendant shadows, no dark observers. It's nothing. Yeah, I gasp, struggling for composure. Fine. Bit under the weather. She frowns, her eyes searching my face. You look dreadful. Slept at all? A hollow laugh. Not much. Work stress. I maneuver myself subtly between her and the mirror. Hey, since you're here, help me take this down. Thinking of a change. An eyebrow arches. The mirror you just hung? Thought you adored it? Changed my mind, I lie smoothly. Doesn't quite work. She shrugs. Okay, sure. Where to? My car for now. Going to sell it. Together, we manage to detach it from the wall. Its weight remains formidable, but manageable between us. I insist on swaddling it in a heavy blanket before we carry it down. Chloe shoots me perplexed looks, but complies without argument. Seriously, Elias, are you all right? She asks as the boot clicks shut. You're acting weird? I force a nod, aiming for nonchalance. Just exhausted. Thanks for the help. She doesn't seem convinced, but lets it drop. After she departs, I remain in the car watching the covered mirror in the rear view. A shapeless lump beneath the blanket. Yet as twilight deepens, painting the parking lot in shades of bruised purple, I could swear I detect movement beneath the fabric. Faint stirrings like something testing its confinement. The engine turns over, settling into a low thrum. Where to take this cursed object? A deep quarry, perhaps? A remote landfill? Somewhere oblivion might claim it. The engine idles. In the rearview mirror, the boot's interior appears unnaturally dark, absorbing the fading light. I shift into reverse. Turning to check behind me, my eyes flick back to the rearview mirror. A flicker of motion. A dark form rising from the blanketed mass in the boot, reaching, stretching towards the back seat. I slam the gear stick into park, vaulting out of the car, heart seizing. The boot looks undisturbed. The blanket lies inert. All is well, except I know better. They inhabit that space now, waiting, consolidating strength. Hours have passed. I sit here still, in the deserted lot, typing this account onto my phone screen. Night has fully descended. My car stands alone under the sodium glare. Periodically, I check the boot, resisting the urge to open it. The blanket remains still, yet sometimes I imagine ripples traversing its surface, betraying subterranean movement. Chloe texted again. Dinner? I should go, simulate normalcy, but I cannot leave the mirror unattended in the car overnight. Cannot risk a break-in unleashing this contagion upon some other unsuspecting soul. So I will drive. Destination unknown, but distant, isolated. Tonight this ends, one way or another. It must. The presences in the glass are undeniably real. Their motives, their selection of me, these remain opaque mysteries, but I will ensure they never reveal their intentions. Starting the engine again. The boot appears benign in the mirror, but reflections have become unreliable narrators. I will drive until a suitable disposal site presents itself. Then, perhaps, sleep will come, untroubled by the phantom gaze from the other side of the glass. The parking lot lamps flicker erratically. It is time. I only hope whatever slumbers beneath that blanket remains quiescent until I arrive. And I pray I never again cross the threshold of an antique shop. Solitude. That was the commodity Elias craved, the balm he sought for nerves frayed thin by the city's incessant clamor. He found the promise of it in a Spartan online advertisement, visited the unit, a study in unassuming beige, and inked the lease that very afternoon. Weariness of intrusive neighbors, of the relentless urban soundscape, had driven him here. This apartment, he assured himself, would be his hermitage. It presented itself cleanly, smelled neutrally of vacancy, resided within a structure utterly devoid of personality. No jarring hues adorned the corridors, no eccentric artifacts hinted at hidden lives. Everything whispered normalcy, a comforting monotony he desperately desired. That placid state, however, proved ephemeral. He moved his meager possessions on a Saturday morning bright with indifference. A sofa, a narrow bed frame, one solitary table, a duo of chairs. Utensils rattled in a box, clothes lay folded in others. Elias hauled it all up the flights himself, the exertion preferable to the awkward choreography of hired help. The apartment unfolded as a constricted living space, flowing into a rudimentary kitchen, a bedroom scarcely larger than its bed, and a compact washroom. The living room surveyed the street below. The kitchen window offered intimate acquaintance with a brick facade, a standard configuration, clad in ubiquitous white paint, illuminated by a single naked bulb in the hallway. Aesthetics were irrelevant. Uninterrupted sleep was the prize. Daylight hours passed uneventfully. Elias unpacked methodically, tested the electrical sockets with a grim satisfaction, confirmed the refrigerator's cold hum. He ran the shower, coaxing hot water from the protesting pipes. Success. He strained his ears for the telltale sounds of occupancy, faint footfalls from above, the muted cadence of voices below. Nothing alarming. A wave of cautious optimism washed over him. An early supper consumed, he settled onto the sofa, scrolling through the digital ether on his phone, absorbing random video fragments, feeling a fragile peace settle. Hours later, drowsiness claimed him. He retired around midnight, anticipating nothing beyond the ordinary. His first night unfolded without incident, leaving only the slight stiffness of an unfamiliar mattress as its mark. Sunday beckoned him outdoors. Elias ambled through the neighborhood, discovering a small corner market, a modest diner, a laundromat tucked away on the adjacent block. The area exuded tranquility. Cars lined the curbs patiently. A few residents ambled with their canine companions. The weather held mild, the sun casting long, gentle shadows. This, he mused, felt correct. A quiet pocket where existence could proceed unmolested. Returning in the afternoon, he prepared a simple meal, then positioned his television on the living room floor, lacking a proper stand. He plugged it in, surrendered to the flickering screen, absorbing news reports and the vacuous drama of reality programming. As evening deepened, the looming necessity of Monday's early start prompted him to power down the set, brush his teeth, and seek his bed. It was during this second night that the anomaly first surfaced. Engaged in his habit of murmuring self-reminders in the bathroom mirror, pack lunch, alarm at 6, Elias detected a faint resonance. So subtle, he initially dismissed it as an auditory illusion. Yet it wasn't a typical echo. A distinct lag separated his utterance from its repetition, a slight delay that felt unnatural. The sound itself seemed muffled, filtered. He paused, listening intently into the silence. Nothing. Shrugging it off as plumbing idiosyncrasies or hallway acoustics, he extinguished the light and retreated to his bedroom. Monday morning arrived with the pre-dawn chill. The workday unfolded with predictable tedium. Elias returned home near 7 in the evening, feet aching, shoulders knotted with tension. His agenda was simple: quick sustenance, a shower, then oblivion. He nuked a pre-packaged meal, consumed it standing in the kitchen, deposited the empty container in the bin. Then the shower. He twisted the faucet, letting steam bloom in the small bathroom. Water hissed, pipes groaned their ancient complaints. As he rinsed, Elias resumed his quiet soliloquy, cataloging the next day's obligations. And there it was again, the echo, barely audible, demanding concentration. At first, it seemed to parrot fragments of his speech, but slower, distorted. Then it shifted. Instead of mimicry, it offered something else, a whisper, nearly unintelligible, yet disturbingly like his own voice, pitched lower, hesitant. He cut the water flow abruptly, stood dripping, skin prickling, heart hammering against his ribs. Silence descended, punctuated only by the rhythmic plink of water from the faucet. He waited. Nothing more followed. Fatigue, he reasoned, or the building settling, its aged pipes singing strange songs. He toweled off, dressed, and willed the incident from his mind. Later, lying in bed, Elias stared at the textured ceiling. The apartment lay shrouded in darkness, save for the faint urban glow filtering through the window, casting phantom shapes across the living room. Sleep remained elusive, a sense of unease prickling at the edges of his consciousness. Then, a soft, distant sound, like his own voice, calling his name. He bolted upright, fumbling for the bedside lamp. The sudden light banished the shadows, but not the frantic pounding in his ears. Was it real? A hypnagogic trick? After minutes suspended in tense silence, he convinced himself it was the latter, forcing his body back down onto the mattress. Tuesday dawned with a throbbing headache. Painkillers and coffee propelled him out the door. The day crawled. Elias felt jumpy, hyper-aware. Every phone call, every conversation with a colleague resurrected the memory of that aberrant echo. Its inexplicability gnawed at him. He returned home at the usual hour, deposited his belongings, assembled a rudimentary sandwich, and attempted distraction via television. Restlessness thrummed beneath his skin. He rose and began to pace the confines of his small domain. In the bathroom, lights off, he spoke into the darkness. "Hello?" He half expected the phantom reply. Silence. He moved to the hallway, tried again. His voice bounced back with the expected reverberation of a narrow space. He waited. Still no uncanny delay. A flicker of relief, quickly extinguished. From behind him, a low murmur, barely perceptible, like static coalescing into meaning. He spun around. The hallway stretched empty, yet the air felt distinctly colder. Gooseflesh pebbled his arms. The hairs on his nape prickled. He switched off the hall light and retreated to the living room, chiding himself for succumbing to self-induced frights. Nightfall brought no solace. Elias opened the living room window, inviting the cool night air. Outside, the occasional car passed, a fleeting interruption in the prevailing quiet. He closed the window after a minute, sinking onto the couch, seeking refuge in the mindless engagement of phone games. Perhaps half an hour elapsed before peripheral movement snagged his attention, a shadow detaching itself near the kitchen doorway. He surged to his feet, heart leaping, flicked on the kitchen light. Emptiness greeted him. Adrenaline surged, a metallic taste flooding his mouth. Imagination, surely. A trick of light, though no reflective surface offered a plausible explanation. He resolved to sleep, to escape consciousness. Before heading towards the bedroom, he declared aloud, perhaps to the apartment itself, "I'm done with this." The echo answered instantly, "Done with this." But the tone was warped, drawn out, mocking. Elias froze, his throat constricting, fingertips tingling. He backed away from the wall he faced, his gaze fixed on its blank, white surface. Drywall, paint, nothing more. Hesitantly, he pressed his ear against it. A faint vibration met him, rhythmic, like a languid pulse deep within. He recoiled as if burned, nearly fumbling his phone. He fled to the bedroom, shutting the door firmly behind him. Sleep was impossible. He lay rigid beneath the covers, straining his ears. Silence held for several minutes. Then, emanating from the wall behind his headboard, a soft thump-thump, a dull, rhythmic insistence. His chest tightened, breath catching shallowly in his throat. He rolled to the far side of the bed, seeking distance from the source. Was the pulse real, or a phantom sensation born of fear? He reached out, touched the wall. Cool, solid plaster met his fingertips. No vibration. Yet pressing his ear close once more conjured it again. That gentle, visceral thrumming. He sat bolt upright, pulling away. He remained awake for hours, adrift in a sea of anxious vigilance, finally succumbing to sheer exhaustion as dawn approached. The following morning, the temptation to call in sick was strong, but practicality prevailed. Money was essential, absenteeism frowned upon in a new position. His thoughts remained chaotic, replaying the echo's mocking tone. An acoustic anomaly? A hidden device? During his lunch break, he considered researching online, but recoiled from the potential absurdity. What search terms could possibly capture this? Apartment mimics voice incorrectly? It sounded like nascent madness. After work, Elias stopped for groceries, steeling himself for the return. The moment he crossed the threshold, the familiar sense of being observed descended. The living room's overhead light flickered once, then held steady. The air felt heavy, stagnant. He deposited the groceries in the kitchen, then turned, deliberately surveying the living area, forcing calm. Dust motes danced in the light. The sofa sat inert. The television screen remained dark. Nothing tangible was amiss. Still, His heart drummed a frantic rhythm. He decided to investigate the walls systematically. He moved through the apartment, pressing his ear to each surface. Living room walls, silent, inert. Kitchen, the same. In the hallway, he paused. Midway down its length, a subtle vibration, a low hum could be felt. He placed his palms flat against the plaster. Normal coolness at first, then the soft pulsing returned beneath his hands. He snatched them back. He tried speaking. Hello? A beat of silence. Then, from the far end of the corridor, his own voice drifted back, quiet, elongated, Hilu. A forced rasp clung to the sound. Elias stumbled back into the living room, heart pounding against his ribs. Minutes later, he dialed the landlord's number, voicemail. Elias left a message mentioning a query about the building's construction, his voice betraying a slight tremor. He omitted the echo, fearing dismissal as unstable. He requested a callback at the landlord's convenience, hung up, and sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his phone. The urge to call someone, anyone, was strong, but he had no close confidants in this city. His colleagues were mere acquaintances, unsuitable confessors for such bizarre phenomena. Isolation pressed in, amplifying his anxiety. That evening, he attempted sleep on the couch, the television murmuring on low volume, its pale light a feeble ward against the darkness. He drifted into a shallow doze, only to be jolted awake by a voice emerging from the TV speaker. Not the program he'd left on, just static, thick, and churning. Yet woven within the hiss that Elias heard his own name, repeated insistently. He scrambled for the remote, silencing the set. The static died. The room plunged into silence, save for his own ragged breathing. His chest felt painfully constricted. He switched on the living room lamp, squinting against the sudden glare. He scanned the room, half expecting a figure lurkins in the periphery. Nothing. He sat, rubbing his temples, fighting for composure. A few minutes later, the echo manifested from the hallway, softly spoken, as if seeking his attention, the words indistinct, just the unsettling timbre of his own voice, imbued with a strange tremor. Elias clenched his teeth, trying to ignore it. Then, resolve hardening, he decided to confront it. He moved slowly into the hallway. The overhead light flickered erratically. He stopped in the center, flanked by the bathroom and bedroom doors. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice loud in the confined space, reverberating sharply. He waited, breath held. The echo returned after its characteristic pause, but the words were corrupted. "Who's there?" A wet, gurgling quality infected the sound. Nausea churned in his stomach. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "Stop," he whispered hoarsely. The echo replied instantly. "Stop." The voice flat, deeper, blunt. His palms grew slick, his mouth arid. He stepped forward, reaching tentatively towards the wall. Again, that slow, rhythmic pulse beneath the surface, like a buried heart. He snatched his hand back as if shocked. Whirling, he fled into the bedroom, slammed the door, and twisted the lock. A futile gesture, he knew, but a necessary ritual. He sank onto the bed, breath coming in ragged gasps. Darkness pressed in. He switched on the bedside lamp. Its weak yellow glow illuminated rumpled sheets, a pile of discarded clothes. He listened. The walls remained silent for a long interval. Then behind the headboard, the gentle thumping resumed. Elias pressed his palms hard against his ears, a low groan escaping his lips. His stomach clenched. Tremors ran through his limbs. His breathing grew rapid, shallow. Eventually, he retrieved a flashlight from the closet. He approached the wall again, sweeping the beam across its surface, searching for imperfections, cracks, seams, hidden grills. Nothing but smooth, painted plaster. He tapped it gently. It sounded vaguely hollow. Crouching, he pressed his ear near the baseboard. The pulse persisted, faint but steady, seeming to originate from deep within the structure. He stood abruptly, dizziness washing over him, his headache returning with force. He switched off the flashlight, collapsing onto the bed. He remained awake until the first hints of morning light bled through the curtains, caught in a purgatory between wakened dread and exhausted, dream-haunted slumber. Faint murmurs seemed to emanate from the walls whenever consciousness threatened to release him. The apartment felt sentient, breathing around him. He fought the thought, clinging to rationality. When true daylight arrived, Elias dressed for work, feeling hollowed out. His eyes burned. His legs felt like lead. Crossing the living room, he noted the disarray of blankets on the couch. The air felt thick, oppressive. He grabbed his keys, exited the apartment, locked the door with trembling fingers. In the stairwell, a wave of profound relief washed over him, simply being outside the unit. Throughout the workday, he compulsively checked his phone. No missed calls from the landlord. As the day waned, the prospect of returning filled him with a chilling dread. He lingered at the office, shuffling papers, engaging in aimless conversation. Eventually, excuses ran dry. He drove home sluggishly, a knot tightening in his stomach. Outside the building, he paused, gazing up at the windows. His own remained dark, offering no clue to the state within. Taking a deep, unsteady breath, he entered. The corridor leading to his door was silent, the overhead lights humming faintly. He unlocked the door, pushed it open. The stale air embraced him like a shroud. He dropped his bag near the sofa, his eyes sweeping the living room. No visible change. He flicked the light switch. It remained steady this time. He exhaled slowly. For a moment, the walls were quiet. He took a few cautious steps towards the bedroom. That was when the echo spoke, unprompted. "I'm here." Elias froze, his hand tightening instinctively around his phone. His heart hammered. The voice seemed to originate from the hallway's direction, yet nothing was visible. He swallowed against the dryness in his throat, struggling for composure. How to respond? He backed away slowly, retreating towards the kitchen. Water. He needed water. He turned the faucet. The pipes groaned their protest. Water trickled out. He splashed some on his face, seeking purchase on reality. Then the voice again, closer now, seeming to come from the living room itself. It sounded like, "Face me," but the words fractured, trembled. Elias gripped the sink's edge, eyes fixed on the stream of water. His pulse raced. He shut off the tap, grabbed a glass, filled it. His hand shook, spilling droplets onto the linoleum. He took several sips, set the glass down, tried to formulate a plan. He crept back into the living room. The overhead light buzzed softly. "Why are you here?" Elias asked, his voice thin, unsteady. His words echoed normally, but the reply emanated from the far corner of the room. A low whisper, warped but recognizable as his own voice. Here, why? Bile rose in his throat. His body trembled uncontrollably. He wanted to run, yet felt rooted to the spot. He forced himself towards the corner, just two blank walls meeting at a right angle. He reached out, touched the intersection. Cold paint. A tingling sensation spread up his arm. Beneath his fingertips, he detected the faint, rhythmic pulse within the wall. His breath hitched. He pulled back sharply, retreating to the center of the room, fighting to regulate his frantic heartbeat. Sweat trickled down his temples, plastering his shirt to his back. Enough. He would pack essentials, find a motel, any motel. He retrieved a small duffel bag from the bedroom closet, began stuffing clothes into it haphazardly. As he zipped it closed, the echo whispered his name again, drawing out the syllables, tasting them. Elias clenched his jaw, refusing to acknowledge it. He slung the bag over his shoulder, strode to the front door, hand closing over the knob. "Don't go," the echo pleaded, mimicking his voice but laced with a desperate quiver. Elias wrenched the door open without looking back. He stepped into the hallway, locked the apartment, and practically ran down the stairs, hands shaking violently, heart threatening to batter its way out of his chest. He fumbled with his car keys, engine catching on the second try. He drove away quickly, leaving the apartment lights burning defiantly against the encroaching night. He didn't care about the electricity. Escape was the only imperative. That night, huddled in a cheap motel room miles away, Elias felt a strange admixture of profound relief and lingering terror. His muscles remained coiled tight. Sleep was fleeting. He kept listening, bracing for the echo to follow him, but the motel walls remained blessedly inert, transmitting only the mundane sounds of neighboring guests. He felt shaky, fragile, but marginally calmer, grateful for the sterile anonymity of the room. Yet the knowledge lingered. The apartment waited. For now, he could only try to rest, haunted by the memory of a voice that was his own, yet utterly alien, speaking his words back to him in ways he could neither comprehend nor predict. He evaporated. One moment, a sodden presence beside me, dripping gratitude and rainwater onto the upholstery. The next, simply gone. That absence, sharp as a vacuum, was the prelude. The true symphony of dread hadn't yet begun its crescendo on that ribbon of desolate asphalt, because as I hurtled through the night, I would meet him again and again. Hours had bled into each other, measured only by the hypnotic sweep of the wipers carving arcs through the deluge. The world beyond the glass was watercolor grief, gray bleeding into gray. My journey home, usually a 3-hour affair, felt stretched thin, interminable. 2 hours down, fatigue blurring the edges of the road, when a disruption snagged my attention. A silhouette huddled roadside, thumb extended like a fragile question mark against a storm's fury. Every maternal caution screamed against it, a choir of remembered warnings about solitary men on forsaken highways. Yet the sheer weight of solitude, pressing in after miles of engine drone and drumming rain, tilted the scale. Or perhaps it was the figure's posture, a study in surrendered misery beneath the downpour. The car sighed to a halt on the shoulder. "Destination," I ventured, the word swallowed by the car's damp interior as he folded himself in. Water streamed from him, darkening the passenger seat's fabric. "Just ahead," a voice rasped, surprisingly resonant from his slight frame. "Appreciate the lift." A curt nod, and we merged back into the river of rain-slicked road. Silence descended, thick and heavy, broken only by the metronomic wipers and the percussive rain on the roof. I risked a sideways glance, ready to offer my name, Silas. The name caught, useless, in my throat. Empty space. A void where a man had just been breathing, exhaling mist onto the chilled window. The brake pedal met the floor with sudden violence. The car slewed sideways, tires screaming briefly on the slick tarmac. My gaze darted wildly around the cabin. Hallucination? Had the monotonous drive finally conjured specters from exhaustion? But no, the passenger seat bore the distinct dark map of dampness where he'd sat. The seatbelt, inexplicably, remained clicked shut into its housing. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the impossibility. People didn't sublimate. They didn't just cease to be. A momentary lapse. My mind scrabbled. A micro-sleep. He must have slipped out. Yet the conviction felt hollow. I hadn't drifted, and no one opens a door, unbuckles a belt, and exits a moving vehicle unnoticed. Shaken, hands gripping the wheel with bone-white intensity, I forced the car forward again, engine whining a protest. That's when I saw him, looming out of the rain-lashed gloom, maybe 100 yards ahead. Same posture, same sodden clothes, same supplicating thumb extended into the night. I blinked, hard, scrubbing my eyes, convinced it was a trick of the light, a phantom imprinted on my overtired retinas. But as the distance shrank, denial crumbled under the weight of certainty. It was him. I surged past, a confusing wave of relief and profound unease washing over me. The rearview mirror held his diminishing figure, rooted in the downpour, shrinking into the gray void behind me. Had I slipped a gear in time, experienced some shattering form of déjà vu? Then further on, impossibly, he materialized again. This time, a strange inertia seemed to bleed into the car, slowing my speed as I approached. His eyes met mine as I drew level. Did I imagine a flicker of recognition, of shared, bizarre experience? Absurd. Before conscious thought could intervene, the words spilled out, alien on my own tongue. Ride? He nodded, the ritual repeating itself. He entered, the dampness spreading anew on the already darkened seat. Thanks, the deep voice murmured. Rough night for walking. I opened my mouth, a question forming, a demand for explanation poised on my lips. But turning to face him, I met only emptiness once more. The seatbelt dangled, unclicked this time, swinging gently with the car's motion. A film of cold sweat prickled my forehead. This wasn't happening. It defied the laws that tethered reality together. I stomped the accelerator, the engine roaring, desperate to outrun this persistent anomaly. Distance proved irrelevant. Speed offered no escape. The highway became a nightmarish loop. Every few miles, the phantom manifested. Sometimes roadside left, sometimes right, always drenched, always waiting. I lost count of the appearances, 10, 20, perhaps more. Each time, a sliver of morbid curiosity urged me to stop, to confront, to understand. But primal fear, stark and absolute, kept my foot pressed down. As the night deepened, the encounters mutated, growing bolder, more terrifying. Sometimes I'd glance over, and he'd be there, beside me, gaze fixed stonily ahead, utterly ignoring my presence as if I were the ghost. Other times, a flicker in the rear view revealed him occupying the back seat, a silent, dripping passenger observing the back of my head. The apex of horror arrived via the side mirror, his form impossibly keeping pace, running alongside the car as the speedometer needle climbed towards 90, face an indistinct blur in the spray and darkness. I fought back with pathetic gestures of sanity, pinching my own flesh until it bruised, dousing my face with frigid water from a bottle at my feet, the sharp sting of a self-inflicted slap echoing in the claustrophobic cabin. Useless rituals against an encroaching, inexplicable madness. The hitchhiker remained, unbound by logic or pain, in eternal recurrence in the storm. Through the gray smear of pre-dawn, a sign emerged, haloed in the headlights. My exit. Relief washed over me, potent and dizzying, almost nauseating. I navigated the familiar turnoff, limbs trembling, either cocktail of terror and profound exhaustion, into the driveway and silence. I sat entombed in the car, afraid to break the spell, afraid of what confirmation a simple turn of the head might bring. Finally, drawing a ragged breath that hitched in my throat, I scanned the interior. Empty. The street outside lay quiet, blessedly, beautifully ordinary under the nascent light. Unsteady legs carried me towards the sanctuary of my front door. Then, a scuff of sound on wet pavement behind me. A footstep. I pivoted slowly, dread a cold, heavy stone plummeting in my gut. He stood at the edge of the drive, where the asphalt met the curb. But the posture was different now, relaxed, almost casual. A smile stretched across his features, unnervingly serene in the pale dawn. Appreciate the ride, his voice drifted, clear as a bell across the morning quiet, impossibly resonant. Until the next one. And as I watched, paralyzed, key clutched tight, he dissolved. Not vanished abruptly as before, but dissolved, like smoke unraveling in the strengthening light, leaving only the damp air and the echo of his words. I remained rooted there for a long time, staring at the space he'd occupied. My mind recoiled, seeking shelter in disbelief, in dreams, in the possibility of a fractured psyche, anything but the stark, impossible truth of the night. Work was unthinkable. The day passed in a blur of drawn curtains and fitful, haunted sleep, every closure of my eyes bringing back the image of a thumb extended in perpetual, patient invitation. A week has trickled by. The car sits idle beneath the carport, a metal shell holding the ghost memory of an impossible passenger. I dissect the night endlessly in my mind, searching for a seam, a rational thread, a flaw in the fabric of reality that might contain an explanation. There is none, only the chilling certainty that the encounter wasn't an end, but a beginning. Sometimes, from the periphery of my vision, when I glance out the window, a figure stands across the street, momentarily there in the rain or twilight, then gone, watching, waiting. The knowledge settles cold and heavy, that road calls, that duty or necessity will eventually demand I travel it again, and he'll be there, soaked, patient, ready. What entity haunts that stretch of rain-swept highway? Ghost? Demon? Hallucination? A tear in the perceived world? I have no name for it. I only know its presence is now stitched into the tapestry of my existence, an indelible stain. So heed this. Should you find yourself on a lonely road, swallowed by night and storm, and spy a solitary figure seeking passage, accelerate, lock your doors, drive on. Do not invite the tempest inside, because some passengers, once welcomed, never truly leave. And the journey they offer reshapes your world into something you may desperately wish to forget, but never, ever can. That crate of cast-offs at the street bazaar, a wiser man would have drifted by, unseeing, but a particular slant of sunlight caught the brittle, transparent shells within, a glint that snagged my gaze, halting me in the slow current of browsers. Now, sleep is a forgotten country. A tremor lives in my hands whenever static whispers from any speaker. My neck aches from the constant furtive glances over my shoulder, a primal certainty that someone unseen occupies the space just behind my sight line. Allow me to unravel the sequence precisely as it unfolded. It happened last Saturday, bathed in the crystalline light of an October morning, the kind where each breath feels like swallowing shards of chilled air. I was adrift in the Winston Street Market, aimlessly navigating the archipelagos of other lives' remnants, a weekend ritual devoid of purpose. Beneath a precarious folding table, nestled in a bruised cardboard box, lay the cassettes, perhaps 30 of them. They bore no markings save small adhesive paper squares, each inscribed with a date in ghostly cerulean script, faded by time. The crone overseeing the stall, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, asked a mere $5 for the lot. Estate sale acquisitions, she'd rasped, claiming ignorance of their contents or origin. I paid, driven by the vague recollection of my father's archaic Sony Walkman slumbering in some forgotten drawer back home. The tapes slipped from my mind until the deep hours of that night. Engaged in a closet excavation, I unearthed the Walkman. A whim prompted me to test its ancient pulse. The batteries, naturally, were deceased, but fresh ones lay ready. Plucking the topmost cassette from the box, labeled 6 to 1582, I slotted it into the machine and depressed the play mechanism. Initially, only the low hiss of aged magnetic tape filled the headphones, a familiar sonic emptiness. Then, a man's voice materialized, measured and distinct, as if delivering a staid lecture. He spoke of banalities, the day's meteorological temper, the composition of his lunch, reflections on some unremarkable book. diary entries rendered in audio fidelity. My thumb hovered over the fast-forward button when it pierced the mundane drone, a susurrus barely perceptible beneath the primary narration, whispering, "Elias, my name." Stop, rewind, play. There it was again, impossibly distinct despite the tape's vintage. Elias. A clammy film bloomed on my palms. Coincidence, I reasoned frantically, a stray voice captured inadvertently in the recording's ambient background. I snatched another tape, this one dated 9/3/82. A woman's voice now, reciting what sounded like melancholic verse. And again, the intrusion, a different whisper, feminine perhaps, yet undeniably shaping my name. Elias, then again, Elias. 5 more tapes yielded their secrets that night. Each contained disparate primary recordings, quotidian chatter, passages read aloud, fragments of conversations. Yet woven into the tapestry of every single one, spectral voices breathed my name, sometimes solitary, sometimes a chilling echo. Some whispers dripped with malice, others pleaded with an unnerving desperation. One, horrifyingly, chuckled as it formed the syllables. Sleep became an impossibility. I lay rigid in the darkness, my mind grappling with the paradox. These recordings originated in 1982. My own existence commenced in 1990. How could these disembodied voices, trapped on magnetic ribbon decades before my birth, know my name? Sunday dawned gray. I drove, compelled, back to the Winston Street Market. The space where the old woman's stall had stood was barren concrete. Inquiries yielded blank stares. Neighboring vendors professed no memory of her, one insisting that particular patch had remained unoccupied for weeks, despite my purchase only the day prior. She had vanished like morning mist. Returning home, a meticulous obsession took hold. Donning the headphones, I listened to each tape in its entirety, logging the precise timestamps of every whispered utterance. Patterns began to surface, unsettling in their consistency. The whispers never overlapped the main speaker. They inhabited the pauses, the silences, the ambient noise. Their frequency intensified on tapes bearing later dates. The first held but 2 instances. The last I examined that day contained a dozen. The voices varied, male, female, young, old, yet all pronounced my name with chilling accuracy. Elias, the cadence perfect. Some appended phrases. Elias, listen. Elias, help us. Elias, it is time. That afternoon, I contacted my parents. Feigning casual curiosity, I probed. Had they frequented the Winston Street Market pre-1990? Known anyone who habitually made audio recordings back then? Their answers were unequivocal negatives. Researching the dates scrawled on the labels proved fruitless. They corresponded to no significant historical occurrences, no shared calamities, nothing to tether them together. As night fell once more, I selected the tape with the latest date I'd examined, 12/24/82. The recording captured a Christmas Eve gathering. Dishes clattered, laughter erupted intermittently, festive music formed a tinny backdrop. The whispers commenced as before, Elias, Elias. Then, precisely 42 minutes into the recording, an abrupt cessation. The familial chatter, the music, the ambient sounds, all sheared off mid-syllable, plunging the tape into absolute silence. and from that void, a unified chorus of whispers arose, speaking as one. Elias, we have awaited your arrival. The tape continued its silent spooling, punctuated only by sporadic crackles of static. Just as I reached to eject it, new voices emerged, not whispers now, but clear conversational tones. Is he attuned yet? Affirmative. The tapes are in his possession. All of them? Not the final one. Not yet. Excellent. Preparedness is lacking. The timing? Imminent. Awareness will dawn. Then, chillingly, they began to describe me. My apartment's layout. The specific clothes I wore at that very moment. The half-consumed mug of cold coffee beside me. The threadbare patch on my bedroom carpet. Details impossible for anything to know. I tore the headphones away, the plastic biting into my ears. My hands trembled violently, fumbling the Walkman. It struck the floor with a sharp crack, the battery cover springing loose. No further tapes have played since that night. They reside in their cardboard sarcophagus within my closet. Discarding them feels impossible, yet the prospect of listening further, particularly to the last, the one dated the 12/31/82, fills me with a paralyzing dread. It differs from its brethren. Its casing is not transparent, but an opaque, lightless black. The label isn't handwritten, but starkly typed, and it alone radiates a faint, persistent warmth, as if perpetually basking in unseen sunlight, despite days spent in the closet's cool darkness. Sometimes, in the dead hours, I imagine I hear them, sibilant murmurs emanating from the box. My name, repeated endlessly, interspersed with other words, just beyond the threshold of comprehension. Yesterday, returning from the sterile anonymity of work, I found the Walkman placed deliberately upon my bed, loaded within it the black tape. I know with unshakable certainty that I left both items secured in the closet. I know I locked my apartment door upon leaving. Sleep has not visited since. I exist in my living room, bathed in the artificial glare of every light fixture, my gaze fixed upon the closet door. The whispers intensify, growing bolder. They no longer require the medium of magnetic tape. An hour passed, my telephone shrilled. Answering, I was met first by a roar of static, then by those same distinct voices from the Christmas Eve recording. The time is now, Elias. Engage the final one. I document this because the need for someone else to know, to bear witness to this unfolding horror, is overwhelming. The black cassette sits on my desk, awaiting void. The whispers claim a vigil spanning 4 decades. They insist I am the sole recipient of their calls. They profess a need for my assistance. They confess hunger. My fingers tremble as I type these words. The whispers are starkly audible now, independent of any device. They articulate new desires, instructing me on the actions they demand. The black tape's warmth intensifies hourly. I can feel its unnatural heat across the room, a palpable presence. Every rational instinct screams against it, a primal command. Do not play it, and yet, I will. God forgive me. I am going to play it. The need to understand, even if that understanding brings annihilation, consumes me. I hear the whispers quicken, laced with a terrifying excitement. They perceive my resolve. The final tape is in my grasp. It pulses with heat, disturbingly akin to a living heart. I will record what transpires. 11:42 p.m. The cassette rests within the Walkman. My fingertip hovers, a breath away from the play button. 11:43 p.m. Their voices are crystalline now. Proceed, Elias. Grant us release. 11:44 p.m. The black tape scalds my skin. 11:45 p.m. A heavy knocking reverberates from my apartment door. 11:46 p.m. The whispers cease abruptly. Silence descends, absolute and profound. 11:47 p.m. The knocking escalates, frantic now. I think I discern voices in the corridor chanting my name. 11:48 p.m. My phone rings. Caller ID unknown. 11:49 p.m. Every electronic device in my apartment springs to life simultaneously. Screens blaze with frantic static. 11:50 p.m. Darkness. The power grid fails. Typing now by the phone's waning light. 11:51 p.m. The knocking has stopped. All sound has ceased. Utter stillness. 11:52 p.m. I am pressing play now. Should you read this, assume that I am. The remainder of the document dissolves into an unreadable cascade of random characters, glyphs, and symbols, concluding with a single chilling line of text. Liberation is ours. Gratitude, Elias.